Precious saints, I just firstly want to thank you so much for your prayers for my family. We're still in the thick of things. There's a little bit of progress, but we're far from out the other side yet. So just really would appreciate continued prayer for strengthening and undergirding, because it's been quite a long journey. It's the 25th day now, so it's been quite a process, but in it all, the Spirit of God has been speaking. So thank you so much for your prayers. I want to speak to you today about the pressing of the sons of oil. As we have just passed the Pentecost of Oil on the 22nd of Elul in the Early Barley Ripeness calendar, I have been focusing and studying the subject of pressing. We covered it in some detail when I did all the messages on the wine press, but pressing olives is a different story to crushing and pressing grapes. The pressing to produce oil is about anointing being poured forth from the fruit of the olive tree, which we are grafted into. Grapes are crushed by hand or trampling, but olives are crushed by a giant millstone being rolled over them by a donkey, and then pressed in baskets made from fiber from the date palm. Actually, even before the appointment with the millstone, the trees undergo a shaking to harvest the ripe olives. More than half of the weight of each olive is pure oil. So at the time of ripeness, there's incredible potential for the flow of anointing. But shaking and crushing before pressing is the only way to release that oil. The first pressing was the purest oil, and in ancient times was used mainly for holy use in the temple and anointing. It's what we would call virgin olive oil. The second pressing was for the crushed pulp, and it was the actual baskets stacked on top of each other containing the pulp that were crushed. Olives in Israel had 3 pressings, and they produced, number 1, olive oil for holy use, which was first fruits oil. Number 2, olive oil for medicinal and cosmetic use. And number 3, olive oil for cooking and soap making. Paul, in the book of 2 Corinthians, speaks of the trials they are undergoing and expresses an incredible pressure that they are under in chapter 1, verse 8 of 2 Corinthians. For we would not have you ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, who raises the dead. The word translated pressed in Greek means weighed down or heavy, and beyond measure is translated from a word meaning a throwing beyond others. So they were experiencing a greater pressing than others had undergone. Their trials were heavier and the attacks greater. They were the apostles, the sent ones, who were being pressed in the place that they were sent to. So it was an appointment. Jesus was the original son of oil, the Messiah. Mashiach means the anointed one. So how was Jesus shaken and pressed? Well, we can see that firstly, after his water baptism, his father endorsed him as his son in whom he was well pleased. So his lineage was clear. A voice from heaven endorsed him. And then the Spirit descended and remained upon him. Now this sounds like the beginning of a very powerful ministry. But instead, straight away, he is led by the Spirit into the desert for his pressing appointment. Why? Because no matter how much oil is contained in an olive, it cannot flow without the crushing and the pressing. Matthew 4 verse 1 says, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted," or tested and tried, by the devil. He was tested and assayed in the wilderness for 40 days. The word translated tempted or tested is perazzo. It means to test, to scrutinize, to discipline, to assay, to examine, or to prove. Was he really the anointed one? Was he really the Son of God? When pressed, what would emerge from him? Jesus had 3 pressings in the desert when he was tested and tried. And pressing always comes from above, even if the enemy is used as a source of pressure. So most of us are familiar with the 3 questions or statements that the devil tested him with. After 40 days, he was told to turn the stones into bread. What is this a picture of? It's a suggestion to use your own power as the Son of God to change your circumstances and meet your fleshly need. The second test was when Jesus told him to throw himself off the pinnacle of the temple. It was a test suggesting that you force God's hand to act and save your flesh because he loves you. The third test was when he was offered all the kingdoms of this world. It was a test to see if he would exchange permanent heavenly glory for temporary worldly glory. All 3 pressings are suggestions to short-circuit the pressing time and to bring about the long-awaited meeting of one's need and seeing God's hand act on your behalf, to end the period of suffering immediately and to experience the glory and salvation and provision of God. Now this is important for the man-child company to take note of, because after being brought to a place of physical exhaustion and weakness from a testing and a trial, our desire is always for it to be over as quickly as possible. And that's why the shortcuts that the devil offered are real temptations. But in reality, every one of the 3 pressings embodied the exchanging of who you worship and submit to, from the God of all heaven to Satan. So I want to say to you, man-child company that are being pressed at the moment, choose this day whom you will serve. And no matter what avenue of getting out of the pressing is offered to you, do not take it, but submit to the Lord's will and the Lord's timing. Luke 4 verse 13 tells us that after having finished every temptation, the devil departed from him for a season, and Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and a report went out through all the neighborhood about him. So we see that at the end of the time of pressing, the 3 pressings, it is the power of the Spirit or the flow of the anointing that is released from the Son of God. John 2 verse 11 speaks about the first fruits miracle that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. And John says he manifested his glory and his disciples believed on him. So when the pressing is complete, the oil of anointing can flow and the glory can be manifested in the sons of God. That miracle at Cana was very significant because it was 450 years since the Jews had seen a miracle take place. The last miracle that had been seen in Israel happened in Daniel 6, when Daniel was supernaturally protected in the lion's den. Now it's important to look at what Jesus, the Son of God, experienced in his ministry, because he's bringing forth many sons, the sons of God that the earth is groaning for their manifestation. But before the manifestation comes the pressing. The sons of oil, the anointed ones, who have the Father endorse them by saying he is well pleased with them, have to experience pressing before the oil of anointing can flow and they can come out of the place of pressing in the power of the Spirit. That is the manifestation of the sons of God. Now, at the culmination of Jesus' ministry, at the end of the 3.5 years, he again had an appointment with the press. Gethsemane comes from two words, Gath and Shemen. Gath means press, and Shemen means oil or anointing. So Gethsemane is the olive press. So Jesus also had 3 pressings in Gethsemane. How significant is that? Let's read what happened. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, "Sit down here while I go over yonder and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, which was James and John, he began to show grief and distress of mind and was deeply depressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sad and deeply grieved, so that I'm almost dying of sorrow. Stay here and keep awake and keep watch with me." And going a little further, he threw himself upon the ground on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but as you will." This was the first pressing. Pressing is always involving a wrestling with God and the will of God, and the subduing of your flesh and your soul, and submitting them to the will of God, even though it is uncomfortable for you. Then Matthew 26 verse 40 says, "And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, 'What, are you utterly unable to stay awake and keep watch with me for 1 hour? All of you must keep awake and watch and pray, that you do not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' And again a second time he went away and prayed, 'My Father, if this cannot pass by unless I drink it, your will be done.'" That is the completion of the second pressing. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were weighed down with sleep. That word "weighed down" is G916, and it actually means to press, heavy. So we see that a spirit of slumber can press down on you and cause you to miss your appointed time of watching. Or you could be putting the flesh to death, as Jesus was doing, and be praying, "Father, your will be done." In verse 44 it says, "So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for a 3rd time, using the same words." Here is the description of the 3rd pressing in the oil press of Gethsemane. And Luke gives us a detail that Matthew doesn't. It says in verse 43 of chapter 22, "And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him in spirit. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly and intently, and his sweat became like great drops of blood dropping down on the ground. Back to Matthew 26. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? The hour is at hand." How sad that was. So Jesus told them to watch that they didn't enter into temptation. That Greek word means the trial of man's fidelity, integrity, or constancy. It's an enticement to sin, whether arising from inward desire or outward circumstances. It's also used of the temptation by which the devil sought to divert Jesus the Messiah from his divine purpose. So the reason we should be watching and praying and not letting a spirit of slumber overtake us is because the enemy wants to divert us from our divine purpose. Temptation tests one's character, faith, and holiness. And that Greek word for temptation comes from a root word, which is the word for testing and assaying. Assaying is what you do with a metal to test its purity. The pressing happens in your wrestling with the will of God and submitting to it, even though everything in you, your flesh and your soul, wants to run a mile. Jesus knew that betrayal was about to take place, that much pain and suffering would follow before he completed his assignment. But he understood why it had to happen, and an angel was sent to strengthen him. Psalm 73 verse 26 says this, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." You do not survive the pressing in your own strength. The only way you survive the oil press is because God is the strength of your heart, and he sends his angels to strengthen you. Under a pressing, there is a need for patience and endurance, to yield and submit until the work is complete. And I know many of you are going through pressings of different forms at this time. Our family is going through an incredible pressing in this time. And looking in the natural, it doesn't look like a lot is being accomplished. And there is a continual temptation to take things into your own hands and to try and change what's happening and to speed it up. But that is the flesh speaking. And so this is why there is a need for patience and endurance. In Hebrews 10, verse 35, it says, "Do not fling away your fearless confidence, for it carries a great and glorious compensation of reward. For you have need of steadfast patience and endurance, so that you may perform and fully accomplish the will of God, and thus receive and carry away and enjoy to the full what is promised." The word for patience and endurance is G5281. It means steadfastness, not being swerved from the purpose and loyalty to faith and holiness, even by the greatest trials and sufferings. Remember with Job in his pressings, that what Satan wanted him to do was to deny God and turn his back on God. That's why Jesus said, Not my will, but your will be done. And what did Job say? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Now that Greek word for steadfastness and endurance comes from another word, G5278, hupomenu. It means to stay under, not to flee, to remain and undergo and bear trials, to abide. So you stay under the pressure of the oil press. You don't wiggle your way out the side and get out of it. This staying under the burden speaks to me of the donkey, the burden bearer, which is related to the Issachar company that has understanding of the times. Now is not the time to flee the trial. Now is the time to endure, to remain under the burden. Now is the time for steadfast patience, because God is working. He is producing a pure flow of anointing oil. And, little donkey, you are carrying the presence of Jesus into the city. I wonder if this is why donkeys have a cross marking on their backs, because they patiently bear the weight of whatever you put on them. Donkeys have strength and endurance. And of course, donkeys were used in the initial crushing part of olive processing, the first part that causes the first fruits, virgin olive oil, to begin to flow. This is accomplished by the strength of the donkey turning this giant millstone as it rolls over the olives in a circular motion. In other words, that great weight may pass over you more than once. And in the transcript of the message, I show you a picture of that big millstone that the donkeys pushed round and round. The pressing of the olive pulp was done in baskets made from the fiber of the date palm. The pulp was scraped into these baskets, and they were stacked on top of one another, and then the press was pressed down on top of them. The date palm represents the bride. Song of Songs 7 verse 7 tells us. But it also refers to Deborah, who sat and judged righteously beneath a date palm. Judges 4 verse 4 says, Deborah, the prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, which means fiery flame, judged Israel at that time. She sat under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came up to her for judgment. So there was a flow of the anointing of wisdom that came from Deborah as she sat under that palm tree. The fiber and trunk of the date palm represent the covering of the tree, the garment and the support structure. And just as the old priestly garments were torn up to make wicks for the oil lamps, so too the outer garment of the date palm bride is stripped to weave baskets to hold the olive pulp. Then both the pulp and the baskets are pressed together, and the oil runs through the pressed basket into the collection container. The date palm's garments of an old season formed the sieve that held back the pulp and released the pure, clear golden oil of 3 pressings. Nothing was wasted. Once the pressing was complete in ancient times, the pulp was dried and used for fuel for the fire. So I want to say to you, precious remnant, nothing is going to be wasted in this pressing that you're going through. Yes, the garments of an old season are being used to separate out the pulp and the pure oil of anointing. And yes, there's an incredible weight and pressure coming from above, and you know God has got you in this place, but it feels like he's allowing the devil to kill you in the process. It's not unto destruction. I want you to know that. God is working patience and endurance in you. And do you know why he's building it in you now? Let me read you something. In Revelation 14, verse 11, it's describing those who pay homage to the beast and his image and who receive the stamp of his name upon them. And verse 12 says, herein is a call for the steadfastness of the saints. The Amplified says, the patience and endurance of the people of God who habitually keep God's commandments and their faith in Jesus. The reason God has you in a pressing now is to build incredible endurance and strength into you and steadfastness. Yes, it is causing the release of a flow of anointing from your life so that you will come out of this place in the power of the Spirit. But remember that Jesus knew that ahead of him was betrayal and suffering and death. And many believers will be martyred in the days ahead. And those who have no steadfastness and endurance will very quickly give in when they cannot buy or sell without the mark of the beast. But God is calling his true saints, his holy remnant, to be faithful and to endure and to remain steadfast in their holiness unto him. So I just wanted to encourage you that Jesus, the anointed one, the first son of oil, endured 2 pressings at the beginning and at the culmination of his ministry time. And he knows what you are going through, and he will strengthen and establish you. He is the strength of your heart, and you are going to get through this. When all the potential oil has been pressed out of the pulp, the pressing action is stopped. You will need a fullness of anointing in the days ahead. And this is the second purpose of the pressing, is to produce the fullness of anointing, that the manifestation of the sons can be in the power of the Spirit. The Lord bless you and strengthen you with might out of the rich treasury of his glory, to exercise endurance and patience with joy. And I will be following with part 2 of this message in a couple of days. Bless you.